Folks, it's my great pleasure today to introduce Fern Hames. Fern is the Science Manager at Arthur Rylah Institute, and she normally looks after the collaboration and communications team, but nowadays she's taken on an extra role to lead the division's Victorians Valuing Nature program, which is really interesting, important behaviour science program that we're running. And today is the final seminar in our series of seminars this year, where we've been celebrating the 50th year since the establishment of the Institute. There's been various talks that have been given over since June. I think I gave the first talk. All of those talks and Fern's talks will be available on the internet later today. So welcome, Fern. I've been really looking forward to hearing this talk today. Over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kim, and hello everybody. It's terrific to be here today, and I'm so proud of the whole legacy series that we've run. Really, it's been a terrific series celebrating science that matters from ARI. And over that series, you know, we've heard stories about birds. You know, some of the ones that Kim was just playing. We've heard about bats, we've heard about possums, we've heard about fishes, we've heard about plants, we've heard about lots of the things that ARI has done over that 50 years. But to finish it off, let's actually think about the people. What is the role of people in the work that we do, and how has it changed from the 70s into today? Now, before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, as well as any traditional owners with us today, and acknowledge that I'm coming here today from Wurundjeri country. In addition to that, I would like to also acknowledge nature as an inspiration and elder for me, and I think for many of us who work at ARI. Country and the environment and nature shape and inspire a lot of the work that we do, so I'd like to acknowledge that as well. And I would also like to just let you know and advise you that this presentation does contain images of people who have since died, including Aboriginal people. So we've been hearing throughout the whole seminar series that our work has changed. In response to the world around us over time. We've changed in response to the priorities of the community, which is made up of people. We've changed in response to major influences in the world due to people and their actions and decisions. And our work has evolved as our own capabilities and technology and our knowledge has evolved, the boundaries of what we know. So this obviously means that people are integral to what we do, and they shape what we do. Well, which people? There's three categories of people that I want to talk about today. The first are those who shape our priorities, and the community and the larger world that shapes a whole lot of the big issues that are happening in biodiversity and ecological conservation research today. That's really important for us. And then there's the people who are the targets or the users of our work, because this is all applied science, it's all intended to be used by people. And then the other category of people is us. It's those of us at ARI and you, all the people who sit within our networks. And to use a phrase that we've heard a lot this weird year, we are all in this together. You, us, all of us, in trying to do what we can for ecological science and conservation. And I should note that this talk is just my own reflections. So of course it's not comprehensive. I can't talk about everything that ARI has done for 50 years, but I'm going to give some examples of how our work has shifted, and that will be really influenced by my own experience, I guess. But thinking about that first point on what and who shapes our priorities, all the ARI Legacies talks so far have mentioned the impact of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. So this person, Rachel Carson, she's had a huge impact, an amazing legacy on the world. She shaped the world, and she shaped the world that formed ARI. ARI was born because of what happened around the world in response to Silent Spring. And of course, it was also shaped by the existing Fisheries and Wildlife Service that was already in existence before ARI was actually built and became a thing. So when ARI did become a thing, and here it is, I found these old pictures, look at it being built. Like, it's amazing. It does say at the bottom this is out of date. Of course, it is very much out of date now, because we have this magnificent building that we all work in and we're all missing pretty much at the moment. But the building is now here, and I was fascinated to discover in looking at some of these old documents that we've been running seminars right from the start too. So even in 1970, we were aware of the community and connecting with the community. The first seminar was held in the new conference room, which is now our old conference room, on January the 28th, 1970. And it was delivered by Max Downs, who was the former superintendent of game management. And he was talking about the territory of Papua and New Guinea, as it was described there then. And Max noted that any wildlife program should define what the community requires from its wildlife. And he talked about how the people of Papua New Guinea used wildlife for various purposes. This was a particular perspective and lens that we had on wildlife at that time. And before I keep going, I would like to just say a huge thanks and acknowledgement to Panda, Andrew Pickworth, who keeps all of these documents for us and is our resident historian, really. So thank you so much, Panda, for the work that you're doing there. It's incredibly important. So people using wildlife for their own purposes. Well, if you think about it, we were at that time under the Game Act. The 1970s was really a recreational era for us, but our primary act was the Game Act, which was really about recreational purposes, essentially people hunting, really. And there's lots in the Game Act about taking, possessing and killing, lots of descriptions of different kinds of guns. It's a bit different to some of our legislation now. So lots of focus on hunting and killing wildlife. And indeed, when the Queen opened ARI, there are lots of photos of her and the rest of her family and others looking at dead things. Not that I'm suggesting these are hunting species, but there were lots of dead things around. So the hunting focus at that time was on duck, quail and deer. And there's even a stamp series from Fish and Wildlife Victoria in the 70s which depicts these species. Hunting was the key thing, but fishing was also really key. Of course, building on that Fisheries and Wildlife Service ancestry that we came from. And to manage those recreational activities, scientific knowledge was critical. It informed the selection of reserves, also reviews of hunting seasons, bag limits, protected species and how we manage those. This is just an example for Tower Hill. And ARI continues to do that. But this was a primary perspective in our work in the 1970s. And then the Wildlife Act came in 1975. And that widened our perspective, if you like, to beyond hunting and recreational species to all species, and was starting to recognise some of the impacts and threats on those animals. And notice it's all about animals so far. So we did a lot of work on pesticides, toxicology, all that sort of stuff, still mindful of this legacy of Rachel Carson's impact. But this Wildlife Act meant that we were also, well, it gave more meaning to the Fisheries and Wildlife Act, I guess. So that was the 70s, big focus on recreation, pesticides, toxicology, and heralding the new Wildlife Act. As we came into the 80s, I think in the broader community, the environment was probably, for many people, still a place that other people went, perhaps something you saw in a movie or in a documentary, but it wasn't a close connection for many, particularly urban Australians, I guess. But the community became more aware of many of the wider impacts on the environment through things like the Franklin Dam movement. It was massive, and it really triggered a major response beyond the usual suspects of people who were interested in conservation up to that point. And it made these issues political. So because people were increasingly interested in supporting the environment in a range of contexts, the community's expectations of nature conservation grew, and so did our responsibilities. So we widened our view again to more than rec species, recreational species, more than what was happening on public land. We started to jump into private land conservation as well. And we also became interested in what was happening in particular industries, such as aquaculture and timber harvesting. And the 80s saw the introduction of the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act, one that's more familiar for us. So this was a real widening of our view beyond what we had been doing in the 70s. Just for a minute, I wanted to jump into one of those industries. For me, my own story begins with ARI in 1983. I joined ARI to lead a research program on Chinook salmon. So this wasn't really about the growing conservation movement. It was about one of those industries that we were interested in. And I spent several years leading that project, where we worked really actively with industry. We ran a whole bunch of workshops absolutely targeted on industry's needs, exploring things like nutrition, genetics, disease, drought resilience, what sites might be useful across the state. And I worked really closely with the aquaculture industry, running some trials in some of their ponds. The program was funded by Mitsubishi, which has a lot of aquaculture interests in Japan, and a lot of folk from Mitsubishi would come out for regular meetings. And this just looks bizarre to me now, but this was a standard sort of annual general meeting for our Chinook salmon project. And I do apologise for my staggeringly awful 1980s suit, but hey, it was the 80s. That's what it was like. There were other industries that ARI was involved in supporting and shaping and providing advice to as well. One of the ones that would be very familiar to many of you is the SSP, the Silvicultural Systems Project, which was trying to identify whether there were alternatives to clear felling in timber harvesting. And it worked at many sites across the Central Highlands and Gippsland. Big project for many people. The 1980s also brought increasing interest in and recognition of the role of private land in conservation. We realised that many habitats were represented really substantially across private land, and that meant that in terms of people, we had a real focus on landholders. Joan Kerner has a really important legacy here. She was important in establishing both land care and land for wildlife, focusing on the role of landholders and private land. And land for wildlife in particular is important for ARI. It started in 1981, and as a start of things that were happening with the Bird Observers Club, really. And before long, we had Steve Platt as a coordinator based at ARI. He had a coordination role, and he was transferring tech advice from ARI that he would hear about in the tea room out to people on farms and landholders, and effectively reaching 14,000 people across the state. So ARI was the technical basis for the scheme. It provided knowledgeable advice through newsletters, field days, all those sorts of things. And Steve also coordinated these field coordinators. Some of you will recognise some of these staff. There's a few familiar faces there to me of people who worked directly with landholders, gave them the important sign, provided information. And this also grew a massive social networking movement in private conservation work as well. And we now recognise social networking like that as a really powerful tool in spreading messages and influencing across the state. So a really important shift. And one of the really important projects in this was the Northern Plains project. Some of you might remember this. It looked at both private and public land, and one of the quotes from this papers by people like Lindy Lumsden, Andrew Bennett and others, lots of people involved in this big project. But this quote typifies, I guess, the response of what this recognised, that remnant vegetation in rural environments occurs on both public and private land, and both are important to a range of species, but in this context, bats, because Lindy was out there doing field days and things and studying bats. And plenty of private land effectively managed as private land sites were included in that assessment. So that was a really important shift. Similarly, in the 1990s was the Box Ironbark project. Similar kind of thing, recognising the role of private land just as much as public land. And these projects really started what we now call science communication. It started developing things like fact sheets, that's when they were born, and they also developed much wider collaboration in the work that we did. When I look at this sheet, I know, I was chatting about it with Lindy, and I know, Lindy looks at it like this. Andy would look at this and go, oh my goodness, it's very text heavy. So this was the start of fact sheets. We evolved a lot. And into the 2000s, they began to look a bit flasher, pretty pictures of bats and all that sort of stuff. And the other thing that was a big change as we got into the 2000s was more, not just sophistication in the fact sheets, but sophistication in our whole methods of community engagement. We began to really deliberately apply the IAP2 spectrum of public participation. This originally, was born as a tool for using in participatory decision making, but it has since been used widely in general guidance around engagement, and we continue to still use it, thinking really clearly about which of the different parts of engagement are relevant for the work that we're focusing on. Is it simply inform? Is it to consult, involve, collaborate, or actually hand over decision making to others through empower? So this has had a big influence on how we actually do community engagement as we got into the 2000s. Now, for me, again, I'm going to jump to my own story. For me, the 2000s meant getting involved with the native fish strategy. My role, based at ARI, was as the Victorian coordinator of the native fish strategy. It was a great place to be based to help coordinate this program, because that's where a lot of the science was happening for native fish in the Victorian part of the Murray-Darling Basin. And if you joined John Kewen's last Legacy Seminar, you would have heard quite a bit of Jono talking about that program, funded by the MGBA. We connected with river communities throughout the Murray-Darling Basin, but for us particularly in Victoria, of course. We connected people with their local rivers, with the fishes within them, and with the new science coming out. And we were really diverse in our engagement, from simple fun stuff, just helping people get to know their local rivers and fishes and systems, to getting land care members really integrally involved in our surveys, and having a bit of a multiple forms of knowledge starting to come in, learning from what they know about their areas as well. When I think about the native fish strategy and legacy, there's so many elements of legacy that are relevant for the native fish strategy, and I can't really let the legacy discussion go by without mentioning the important legacy of some of the other people who were involved in the NFS. ARI had a huge role in this, and so did people in the community and the other agencies. I always called the native fish strategy a program of research, partnerships and action. In Victoria, ARI was the key research arm, but we achieved what we did because it was in partnership with many others across the department, across CMAs and with many community members. And they included the incomparable Wayne Tennant from the Golden Broken CMA, whom I learned an enormous amount from and I still miss, and the incredibly committed and inclined Dave Wakefield and Laurie McMillan from the Strathclyde Landcare Group, Pete Audie from the Flowerdat Environment Engine. Those people are deeply missed, and I just wanted to acknowledge the legacy that they leave behind them. There are many others in both these images that many of you will recognise and know that continue to deliver amazing legacy and committed, dedicated effort in the space of conservation, particularly in, well, across Victoria, but these folk are particularly Golden Broken area, I guess. People like Janet and Terry and Cass and Sue, and no, I'm not going to start names because then I'll leave people out, and I'm not going to do that. But I do acknowledge the legacy of people who have gone and that we miss. And when we talk about legacy, we can't not talk about Finterest, because Finterest was an entire website set up to share the lessons from the native fish strategy, both the scientific lessons and also the engagement lessons, and we published on this. So lots of legacy from that major program, and ARI was key in that. The 2000s, of course, also means Black Saturday. 7th of February 2009 was a really shocking event for many of us, and it had an impact on people as well, of course, as on fish. And through the NFS, I was particularly involved in work that we did for Macquarie perch, but also for this little barred galaxid in the headwaters of the Goulburn River. And people like Tamo, Pete and Mike all got involved in rescuing these fish from little tiny streams and connecting the community with that story. And I've told that story many times in other contexts, and I think it is a really powerful one. But we didn't just connect with the community on that, we also connected with departmental colleagues and others on issues such as salvage logging post-fires. These are really consequential conversations that were very important to have and have continued to be important in the years since then and in subsequent fires. And we connected with traditional owners, kids, anglers. We learned a lot about engagement generally, and also about the science behind working with trauma-affected communities. And we are deliberately applying this again now, particularly after last summer's fires, and we expect that that kind of learning will be really relevant for us into the future. As we shift into the next decade, that brings out Biodiversity 2037, DELWP's 20-year biodiversity strategy. You know, it's a really important strategy. 20 years, 2 key goals. One, as you'd expect, is around improving biodiversity condition, but it also has a primary goal around Victorians valuing nature, connecting Victorians with nature and building the impact of Victorians acting for nature. This is also focused on collaborative collective impact, and of course many of our partners are really deeply committed to this approach and indeed have already been doing it for quite a while. You would know about the efforts of Zoos Vic, Parks Vic, Royal Botanic Gardens, many others already working in this space of the role of the community and collective impact in how we all work together for conservation and get people connected and acting for nature. Because if we have mainstreamed support for nature, widespread advocacy for nature, biodiversity has a better chance. For us at ARI, in terms of thinking about how we get people connected with and acting for nature, one of the ones that's really relevant for us is citizen science. Now, it's been important and part of what ARI has done for quite a long time, but it's been a little bit ad hoc. These days, we are far more strategic, deliberate and targeted in the citizen science that we do. And we know that it's a really important and meaningful way that people can connect with nature and genuinely act for nature in impactful ways. We are also now evaluating the results of that work for both science and the participants. So that's really important, and some of those examples are the work that Casey Stimation and others are doing in identification of southern right whales, the work that Zeb and Pam and others have done in anglers submitting their otoliths so we can tell life history of fishes in the north of the state, Di Crowther and her Dandenong burrowing crayfish work, which just doesn't delight her, it delights everybody who gets involved in that, and incredibly important work on birds as well. So lots of citizen science work that's will increase, I think, and be increasingly important for us. So that's expanded our work at ARI into a new field, really. We are now exploring behaviour science, and we're working with other partners on this, particularly with Behaviour Works Australia at Monash Uni. With them, we have surveyed thousands of people across Victoria to understand their motivations for connecting and acting for nature, the dimensions of their nature connectedness, and the barriers to them connecting and acting for nature. And we used the findings of that work to inform the Nature Festival that we held just recently. It helped us be really targeted in our audiences, actions, and messages. The festival was, of course, virtual. People were joining from their homes or nearby nature, but it demonstrated our capacity to adjust to the demands of the world around us by going virtual. And out of that big survey, we now have a shorter survey, which we are deploying in all kinds of contexts to help us really understand how Victorians are connecting with nature and how we can continue to build that. As well as our work with Behaviour Works Australia at Monash, we're also working with Icon Science at RMIT on which behaviours are the most important ones that people can do to act for nature. Which are the priority behaviours that will make most difference in acting for nature? So that's been really important, also helping us be really targeted in what we want people to do and what kind of behaviour change campaigns and interventions we might do. Now, when I think about people connecting and acting for nature, it actually makes me think of the conservation mural that's in the ARI conference room. Now, I haven't seen this mural for quite a long time because I've been working from home, but we would normally be looking at this mural while we're delivering seminars in the conference room. It will be familiar to many of you. And just because I was not going to be delivering the seminar in the conference room, I was thinking about it, and it made me really reflect on what this mural actually tells us. It was painted by Robert Ingpen, and it's got a pretty interesting story, really dated in a way, and many people will know that I've always said, we need a new frame. There needs to be another panel in this painting. But basically there is a description about what he was aiming for, and this first panel is about nature without people. Now remember, this was painted a long time ago when we still really had that myth of wilderness as a place, you know, that nature existed without people. So it's a particular concept that's dated in our time, I guess. But that's what the first panel is about, no people. The next one with the survey stick here is about we need to understand our environment. We need to survey it and understand what nature is and understand so that when we change it, what will be that effect on nature? And then the third panel is an assumption that man will go beyond what's sustainable, that man will exhaust the resources of nature and have an impact beyond the point of renewal. And then in this final panel, imbalance and pollution are the result of no, in inverted commas, intelligent control by man, also in inverted commas, over nature. And this tandem bike idea of man and nature sharing how we journey through here is abandoned because we have over depleted the resources and things have gone beyond repair. So I think this really triggered us to think this is not the end of the story. We don't have to force nature out of partnership here. We as people can work with nature and form a new relationship with nature, and one with more hope. As part of that new frame, it's pretty clear to me, and I think for many other people, that that new way of recognising our place in the environment will recognise reciprocity in the relationship, where we both gain from and contribute to nature. And this is a bit like the Aboriginal concept of country, where it is a more two-way caring relationship with nature. So I think this kind of understanding and celebrating, understanding and recognising the connection to country that traditional owners have will be important for us, for nature and for the self-determination of Aboriginal people. And DELWP now has a new strategy on self-determination as well, which we are now committed to, and I think links really clearly with this work and our new approach. This, of course, really connects with many of the Sustainable Development Goals as well, which underpin a lot of our work. Of course, this is not new. Lots of people have spoken about this, sung about this, painted about it, have written about this reframing of the way we look at landscape and nature and the relationship that we have with nature. Paul Kelly and Kev Carmody sung about this in that song, This Land Is Mine, where it recognised this land is mine and this land owns me. This is a different way of seeing our place in the world, in nature. So we need to shift that lens and shift our understanding of our place in the world. And there's other things that are going to force us to make some of these changes. The world is dramatically changing. And I often wonder, well, what is the new humanity and what does that mean for science? The Anthropocene means that many things are changing in the world and we are going to need to reflect that. The crises of the Anthropocene are changing what it means to be human and our experience of being human in the world today. This is very different from the 1970s and the 80s. The realities of climate change, persistent emergencies, what COVID-19 has meant this year and who knows what for next year or other pandemics in the future, the reality of depleted nature across the world, the extinction of experience for many people disconnected from nature, and the realities of environmental justice in many contexts around the world. All of these mean that what it means to be human in the world is different, and what it means to connect with and be part of nature is different. So again, this means we need to change our responses, our priorities and actions. And as scientists, so one of the other categories of people that we were going to talk about today, how do scientists embrace this new humanity and way of being in what we do? And again, it's not just us thinking about this. There are multiple movements and directions and strategies globally, all around the world, recognising the need for an integrated, more transformational change, working across silos, recognising multiple forms of knowledge. And these recognise that whereas in the 70s, people were recipients and targets of the work that we do, people are now, the community anyway, what I mean, are participants and partners in the work that we as scientists do in this. Again, we are all in this together. So that suggests to me that we need some more enhanced skills in the way that we do our work at ARI and in other science contexts. We are going to be even more alert to frequent change. We need to be a lot more comfortable with working with uncertainty and how we communicate that to others. We need to be better prepared for emergencies. We need to restore the connections with nature with as many people as we can, embrace multiple forms of knowledge and what they bring to our ways of knowing, including Indigenous knowledge, and in fact embrace transdisciplinarity for the wicked problems of the world. We know that this approach is likely to be more effective for us. I think at ARI we're really well prepared for this. We can do this. We've demonstrated that we have evolved a lot over the last few decades, and we continue to evolve. We've gone from a context in which we basically just told people about things that we did to a much more collaborative and empowered way of working, a partnership arrangement. We've gone from having a lot of tech capability to having a much more higher skilled, multi-skilled, many PhDs, lots of people with lots of different skills, as I mentioned now, behaviour change as well as the usual ecological skills. We've gone from just monitoring what is in place, what a system has in it, to much deeper understanding of those systems and why they are what they are and how they will respond to different changes. A lot more work on analyses, modelling, deep learning, and now behaviour change. We have really focused questions now, and we were doing a lot of work virtually as well. We've gone from basic tech reports to much more sophisticated forms of science communication and data visualisation. And in terms of how we look after our people, I have to say that my own experience of working in the 70s was a little bit sort of, she'll be right, to now we are absolutely focused and serious about safety and well-being for our staff and the people that we work with. Two things that haven't changed and persist are we have really high site fidelity. We have a really high level of people who stay with us and are committed to being part of the ARI team and continue to contribute enormous depths of knowledge and judgment. And across the Institute, we have incredibly high shared values alignment. We are here to all make a difference for biodiversity, and that gives us enormous strength. So I think we're really prepared for the changes in the world. And when I'm thinking about changes, I really can't forget to talk about the changes that we've had in terms of women at ARI. This predates ARI, but in the 30s, this letter from the Chief Inspector of Fisheries and Game literally said netting, fish netting this is a man's occupation, and it is not considered desirable to allow women to use nets. I mean, that is literally laughable now, and I just reflect that, you know, we now have about a third of our staff at ARI are women. Pretty much half of our senior leadership team is women. And I love this still from a little video that iFish made of our all-women electrofishing team doing some work on the Murray. This is one of the capabilities that is in the facts about our staff that is really changed, which will benefit us enormously. This is important in representing the community and having multiple perspectives come to our work. So this is us. This is ARI. This is our team. Our legacy is real and really evident. We do stand on the shoulders, we're literally standing on shoulders here. We stand on the shoulders of all those before us, and we're building on their knowledge, and we're integrating new ways of working, new ways of knowing. We're bringing more diverse ways of thinking and more diverse skills, and we are absolutely evolving what it means to be a scientist in this new, extraordinary world. So at the start, I talked about this ecological equation, and to be honest, I haven't actually made an equation. I've only made a list. But what does this mean for the role of people in this current ecological equation or list? We've shifted from just documenting species and populations so that users can make use of a resource to something that's much wider and responds to our changing world. Today, we need to understand and be part of socio-eco-cultural systems. And that means that we're all partners in this, and all these things will be brought to this equation by all of the people who are interested in being part of the community, decision makers and science. We will all be bringing this to science today. So that's it from me. I invite you to connect with us, join our journey into the next extraordinary 50 years. And I celebrate and applaud all of the work from ARI teams over the years I'm excited to see what we do next. It's been an extraordinary year. I thank you for joining not just this seminar, but all of the seminars that we've had throughout the series. And of course, we'll have a whole raft of different seminars next year. And we may even get back in the conference room and get to have another really good look at the mural. But thank you, Andy. Thank you, Kim. That's it from me.
Thanks very much, Fern. Absolutely fabulous talk, as always. Really always find your talks absolutely exciting and interesting and stimulating. So thank you. We're really grateful for you to present this talk today. And Fern, we have some questions. I'm hoping you'd be prepared to respond to some of them.
Great. I was going to be polite and turn my camera back on, but I can't work out how to do it. So just questions.
Exactly. The first one's from Sue, and it says, are you aware of the nature stewards?
Yes, absolutely. Of course we are. And in fact, when I wrote a recent Victorians Value Nature synthesis document, I made reference to the Nature Stewards program as a case study, a really good example of a program which recognises the need to connect people with nature, does it in a really intentional, deliberate, focused way, in small groups, helping people make sense of what's happening in their own local communities, and builds their own knowledge and builds their own capability as advocates and stewards. So yes, I applaud Nature Stewards. Rah-rah, they're terrific. If you don't know about them, other people, please look them up and support them where you can. They do terrific work.
Thank you. And folks, we've got more space for a couple more questions. If you'd like to use the live event Q&A function on your toolbar on the screen, it'll come directly through to us and we can see them and we can ask them. So plenty of space left for more questions if you'd like. Think about the question you've always wanted to ask Fern and never had the opportunity. This might be the opportunity.
Uh-oh.
Fern, you have the right of refusal, of course. There's a question, Fern, from Leah that says, to finish the mural, we can reflect on Uno's Garden by Graham Base. After everything was destroyed and the people left, nature came back and eventually the forest and the city found themselves in perfect balance. Smiley emoticon. Would you like to respond to that, Fern?
Well, you know, shout out to Graham Base, does amazing work, and really love all of his books and his work. That comment also reminds me of what's happened in Chernobyl, you know, where the forest has come back, the animals have come back, everything has come back when we leave it alone. And it's not as simple as that. You know, I do reject the wilderness myth that we are part of nature. We don't want to have a nature around us which doesn't include us. We need to take more responsibility and regard ourselves as part of natural systems. We can't practice human exemptionalism, to use a phrase that I know Kim is a bit triggered by. But we are part of nature, and it's about getting that balance right and giving nature the opportunity to come back in that way, in a way that we are also an integral part of nature. There are parts of the world, of course, where maybe people just shouldn't be there, and there are parts of Antarctica that I feel about like that. I think maybe we just shouldn't go there. But for most parts of the world that have traditionally been populated by people, and people have lived and managed those lands for a long, long time, I think we need to get the balance right and give nature that chance to come back and be wild, but us travel that journey as well. Does that answer Leah's question, do you think?
I reckon that answers it very nicely. Thank you. Fern, there's another question in from Nick Oloff. He says, as citizen science team leader for Hobsons Bay Wetland Centre, how do I get to know what citizen science activities are out there and how can we get involved?
Oh, what a great question, Nick. So there's so much happening in the citizen science space. And first of all, if you're not already a member, I would encourage you to join in to the Australian Citizen Science Association and sign up for the Victorian chapter. And that chapter is really terrific at sharing news and keeping the sector really beautifully connected across Victoria. And through that sector connection, we are working at trying to support all of the program providers, I guess, in the sector with common tools on best practice in citizen science, common evaluation, trying to develop some common metrics, all of those sorts of things. So that's sort of from the provider perspective. And also on our ARI website, there is a page in which we provide a summary of a very large report that we wrote, bringing together a lot of the information that we have about best practice citizen science in a little report. So you can look up some of that information on ARI's website. From a participant perspective, there's also lots of opportunities to find out what's going on. Again, the Australian Citizen Science Association has a project finder on their site, which includes Victorian opportunities. The ALA, the Atlas of Living Australia, also has a project finder hub on their site. And any of the projects that are on the ALA, the data should ultimately find its way into our VBA data as well, which is great. The other thing is that we are increasingly populating the Victorian website, It's in Our Nature, with information about the opportunities for citizen science and volunteering for nature in all kinds of ways on that site. We're hoping that it will essentially become a kind of hub place where you can find out about not just ways to do citizen science, but how to act for nature, where to tell stories about nature, all kinds of things about nature on that hub site. And we are evolving that site now. It's the site where we ran the Victorian Nature Festival from, and that was bringing together I think 19 different partners, across all of the Vic Environments Forum partners like Parks Vic and the Zoo and the Royal Botanic Gardens and traditional owners and the CMAs, and Phillip Island Nature Parks, Trust for Nature, Sustainability Victoria, all of those were posting information about what opportunities they provide on that site. So, in our research around people acting for nature, it's really evident to us that people need to know about the opportunities and where they can find out where those opportunities are. It's exactly your question, Nick. One of the big barriers is people don't know what to do and how to find out. So we are proposing that this site will become a really useful hub. But in the interim, the Australian Citizen Science Association Project Finder and the ALA Project Finder provide some really good opportunities, as does Swift. So Swift with double F, swift.net.au also has citizen science opportunities listed there, particularly if you're interested in those in bushfire recovery in places like Gippsland. So lots of information there as well. But Nick, why don't you also get in touch with us directly and we can work with you specifically on some citizen science information sharing. That would be really terrific.
Yep, so your address is on the screen right now, and your Twitter handle, and also the ARI website. Fern, there's a question about inclusion of Indigenous people. And Anonymous says, thanks for the interesting background of ARI. There appears to be a lack of inclusion of Indigenous people of colour when considering community. Do you have plans to include these groups and improve the diversity and representation of community and collaborators?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think you can say that we have not included those in our engagement. I think it's true to say that our staff is limited in those regards, and we're always looking for opportunities to improve diversity and inclusion amongst our staff. In terms of our engagement, I think it's something that we are improving on all the time. I think we've worked with traditional owners variably across our history. Certainly, I've worked with traditional owners in a really integral way for at least 2 decades, and I know many people at ARI have done that. We are working really actively on that in particular, and we are about to add another new postdoc position at ARI, which will specifically focus on bringing together multiple ways of knowing in different knowledges, and will help all of us in better diversity and inclusion with regards to traditional owners and Aboriginal people. In regard to cold communities and wider diversity issues, of course that's relevant, and it's something we were particularly mindful of with the Nature Festival, and it's something that we focus on in particular ways depending on the relevant project. So depending on where a project is, what its audience is, what its goal is, we work with different communities in variable ways. So I don't think it's true to say that it is absent. It is true to say that it is something we are really mindful of and actively working to improve all the time, because I think I've mentioned many times here that we definitely recognise the need to include diverse perspectives and multiple ways of seeing the world. So it's really important actively focusing on that, and I'm hoping that our new postdoc will help us do that, particularly in the context of traditional owners and Aboriginal people.
Thank you, Fern. There's another question from Anonymous, presumably another one. It says, thanks for the deep insights, Fern. For a bunch of scientists, from your perspective, how important are the arts in connecting people with nature?
Well, I think incredibly important. You know, arts are a way of telling a story, and our brains are hardwired to respond to story. They are privileged. Story is privileged in the way that our brains respond and recognise pattern. So the opportunity to work more closely with the arts is huge, and something that we should embrace wherever we can. It's something that we have done in minor ways when we've had the opportunity. We certainly did with the native fish strategy, and we've tried to do it in tentative minor ways with the Nature Festival. But it's something that I have very strong personal interest in. The difficulty is finding the resources to do that when resources for just the science parts of the work that we do are limited and constraining. But I see this as the opportunity for partnerships. There's a strong opportunity to partner with artists to tell the stories and to connect people with the things that we're talking about here in deeply powerful and engaging ways. And I mean all forms of art, writers, visual artists, cinematographers, musicians, all of those have really powerful ways of helping drive these issues into mainstream in a much more powerful way than traditional forms of science communication can ever do. So I'm really up for that. I'm interested in finding the partnerships that give us resources to bring our resources together and do that in a powerful way. I think that's definitely a path that's necessary.
Thanks again, Fern. There's a question from Kimberly, and I think the central theme of it is shared by a couple of other questions. And this is really about, what are your thoughts on how to engage the community on biodiversity topics and actions, and particularly those that are less palatable and often highly emotional? And Kimberly refers to invasive species control.
Yeah, well, I refer to the last question, let's use the arts.
Yep.
Is one tool. All the work that we do has a way of finding a hook. Some of them are easier than others, some are harder than others, but I think all of them have the opportunity to be shared in ways that are powerful, engaging, and will connect with people in ways that have meaning for them. So, you know, the power of proper science communication is that it is not just a random thing, it's a deeply thoughtful thing in which we always think about what is the purpose of what we want to convey and communicate. Who is the audience that is affected by this or interested in this? What is the message that will be important for them or resonate with them? And what kind of platforms or forms of doing that will resonate and connect with them? So if we do that thoughtfully in any of those issues, I'm confident there is always a way. The difficulty, of course, is where there are really different views and emotive views in the community. But underlying those views will be things that are common. So people who are concerned about some issues will have a deep connection underneath about the environment. And I think we just need to find the bit that is common and connect with them on that. You know, it reminds me of, it's probably 15 years ago now, we recognised that we had very different views in the community about trout fishing and where trout were distributed across the landscape in Victoria. And we actively brought together the conservation scientists who were interested in small little native fishes that were being eaten by trout, and we brought together the people who were interested in fishing for trout. And at first that was a really uncomfortable conversation because they couldn't see how they could have a shared conversation. But when we really asked people, what do you value? What do you value? What's important to you? What do you care about? We came to understand that there's a lot of commonality in what each of those groups of people care about, and that's what we focused on. And we said, let's work together on the things that we both care about and then get to know each other better and get to resolve some of these questions in a way that we've taken the heat out of the conversation. So it's never easy, but understanding our deeper goal and our really aspirational goal of what we're trying to do, understanding those audiences and their motivations and perspectives and speaking in a way that makes sense to them and framing it in a way that makes sense to them will be critical. So that just really emphasises the need for behaviour change science in what we do. If we want to make a difference, we need to understand those people, and it's actually a behaviour change campaign, not just a communications brochure.
Great, thank you, Fern. Of course, we've got so many questions, we don't have time to cover them all. Folks, the questions we will look at out of session, and I suspect that Fern will probably send you a response one way or another. She might ring you or text you or email you, so your questions won't go to waste and they're of incredibly interest to us. We're also really keen for the audience to complete the feedback survey. Andy's very kindly put the link into the live Q&A session. If you can give us feedback, that allows us to modify the talks, improve the talks to service your interests and needs. So thank you. And Fern, of course, a great, fabulous way to finish our legacy series of seminars. Absolutely incredible experience that you've had. I feel really grateful that you've shared it with me. I'm sure there are many other people out there as well. So thank you very much. Always appreciate it. Really appreciate the effort you've gone to. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining in. Catch you next time.